Hi, I'm Jerry Blackwell, president of the new museum, Truckee History, and I'd like to tell you about the area's museums and how they can help Truckee's tourist industry. As the number of ski days decrease due to global warming, projections are that Truckee will experience an 80% reduction in ski days from the levels reached at the beginning of this century to the end of the century. Along with that, Truckee is experiencing fewer winter visitors. What can we do to offset this decrease and keep Truckee an appealing place to visit? Hopefully, other Truckee attractions will fill the bill. Being outdoors and experiencing nature will continue to appeal to everyone. Hiking, mountain biking, road biking, canoeing, and boating all have the allure to bring visitors to Truckee. Nature will be the biggest draw. Also, stories of our rich history will be a big attraction. The area's museums can hold the interest of individuals and families traveling into Truckee. Today, we now have a number of museums in the area. There are actually 6 museums in the Truckee area. The largest, at Donner Memorial State Park Visitor Center, has exhibits describing the challenges of the early immigrants and subsequent travelers. The Old Jail Museum, just behind Truckee's historic Main Street, gives the details of a wild mountain town. The jail was an important tool to tame Truckee's wild side. The Railroad Museum tells the story of who built the railroad across the western United States, why it was done, and how it was built. And the new Museum of Truckee History describes the development of the area from before the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad through the growth of Truckee's industries and the creation of the town of Truckee. The 20-mile outdoor museum gives motorists information about the sites along Old Highway 40. And the Rail Yard Pocket Park has 2 pieces of railroad equipment that kept the railroad open through Truckee. Donner Memorial Park Visitor Center is the anchor for all these museums. It's the largest and most visited of all 6, with approximately 180,000 visits annually. Within Donner Memorial State Park is a location of cabins built to help the early California immigrants survive the winter. The immigrant monument itself was built on the location of one of these cabins to memorialize their efforts. Truckee's Old Jail is now a museum operated by the Truckee Donner Historical Society. Because it's built of stone and unheated, it's only open in the warmer months. Still, it gets 2,600 visitors annually. The jail was originally built at the end of what was then Truckee's most raucous street. Along the street were bars and other so-called sporting places. Drunks, fights, and other unsocial events would happen there. Constable Teeter got the jail built here so he could only take the jail's customers a short distance. In addition to this wild side story, the museum tells other Truckee stories. The Railroad Museum is a small museum housed in an old Southern Pacific Railroad caboose. Even with a small space, it still has 5,000 visitors annually. The Truckee Donner Railroad Society operates this museum. In the museum is told the story of who, why, and how the Transcontinental Railroad was built. Pictures and displays tell the story of the first railroad to span the continent and the subsequent railroads built for logging and tourism. The outdoor rail yard pocket park is on the location of the old Truckee rail yards. From here, helper locomotives were added to the westbound trains to help them get over Donner Pass. The rotary snow plow cleared the tracks over the Sierras and kept the trains running both east and west. And the wrecking crane was used to unblock wrecks and restore the railroad to running order. Both pieces of equipment were extensively used in the Truckee area. The 20-Mile Museum is a collection of interpretive signs along old Highway 40 that makes Truckee's history come to life. There are dozens of signs throughout the 20-mile section of Donner Pass Road from Cisco Grove to Donner Lake. Each one tells a different story about local history. As you drive along this outdoor museum, you'll learn about ice harvesting, the Transcontinental Railroad, Native American petroglyphs and grinding stones, the history of skiing on Donner Summit, and much more. The Donner Summit Museum is also operated by the Donner Summit Historical Society. Norm Saylor operates the museum, and he's a rich source of historical information, as well as the caretaker of a trove of old photographs. So where are these museums? Donner Summit Museum itself is at Soda Springs, and the 20-Mile Museum extends from Truckee to Cisco along Highway 40. The Donner Museum is, of course, in the Donner State Park Visitor Center on the east end of Donner Lake. The old jail is just north of the Truckee's historical downtown on Jaboom Street. And the Railroad Museum is in an old caboose at the west end of Truckee's Railroad Depot. The new Museum of Truckee History is inside the Truckee Railroad Depot on its east end. Lastly, the Rail Yard Pocket Park is located just east of historic downtown Truckee at the end of a long parking lot. So what's this new museum like? As you enter the new Museum of Truckee History, you'll be in the old trainmaster's office. Walking further, you'll see exhibits of the Truckee Chinese, logging and lumber, the Native Indians, the stories of the ice harvest, Boca Beer, McGlashan's role in tourism, Truckee from the 1960 Olympics to the present-day town of Truckee, and a series of railroad models showing the evolution of trains on the railroad. Finally, there's a bell from a steam locomotive. Walking into the train master's office looks much as it did when the Truckee train master was there. There are desks, cabinets, and stoves that were used in the depot. The train master controlled Truckee's passenger and freight trains, as well as keeping track of shipping of Truckee's merchants. In addition, there's information about the Transcontinental Railroad and the railroad to Lake Tahoe. And, of course, each exhibit has an interactive display that lets you delve further into the exhibit's information. The next exhibit has displays and artifacts describing the Truckee herb shop. Truckee's Chinese also operated groceries, barbershops, tea shops, opium houses, and a bathhouse. Today, the only building from Truckee's Chinatown Pass that exists is the Chinese herb shop located across the river from downtown. The little shop, built in 1878, is a brick fireproof building with iron metal shutters that have survived many fires. From the 1920s up until the 1960s, it was used as a Truckee bottling works and was rumored to have the finest bootlegged whiskey in town. Approximately 14,000 Chinese were hired to build the Transcontinental Railroad. After its completion in 1869, the workers settled along the railroad or went to help other railroads. Some Chinese became Truckee woodcutters, working to cut firewood for both the town residents and the railroad's wood-burning locomotives. In this exhibit, saws and other documents help tell the story of Truckee's lumber industry. Lumbermen who rode the newly completed Transcontinental Railroad saw the potential of Truckee's sugar pine forest. Sugar pine is a light wood and resists deformity. It's easily milled and is favored for doors, windows, and door frames. Within 11 years, the loggers had cut down the trees near Truckee. Loggers then built narrow-gauge railroads to get deeper into Truckee's surrounding forests. They launched approximately 24 lumber mills with supporting railroads in the area. Again, An interpretive computer display gives visitors the opportunity to delve further into this major Truckee industry. The next exhibit displays baby carriers and grinding stones used by the Indians in the area. During summer, the Indians harvested pine nuts and acorns. They ground the nuts to make a paste for pine nut soup or gruel. The pinyon nuts are a major storable multifaceted food. Pine nuts are high in protein and fats. The fat content exceeds that of chocolate, and both contain all 20 amino acids required for human growth. Our native Indians were the Washoe, Paiute, Martis, and Madu tribes. These Indians all spent time here during the summer. The Washoe were the primary tribe in the area, and even in winter, the Washoe lived on the shores of Lake Tahoe. The town of Truckee and the river were named after a Paiute chief. When the first wagon train to cross the Sierras came to a point where the Humboldt River disappears into the desert sand, Caleb Greenwood, one of the mountain guides, went searching for water. Caleb came upon a Paiute hunting party, and the chief kept saying Truckee. Greenwood assumed that that was his name, and the name stuck. Several years ago, a linguist was studying the Paiute language and found the true meaning of Truckee. What the chief was really trying to tell Greenwood was that it was okay to go west for water. Another early Truckee industry was built on blocks of ice. Settlers in the Truckee area watched as thick layers of ice froze in the area's many ponds. Enterprising residents began to cut the ice into blocks and take it to the railroad. This was before the days of mechanical refrigeration. Here are tools to cut the ice blocks and move the ice to the ice house. The Transcontinental Railroad then shipped the ice in insulated boxcars to San Francisco, California's Central Valley, and points east. The ice was used for homes, but it's also the Central Valley farmers shipping their fruits and vegetables in ice-cooled boxcars to the Midwest that greatly helped them. This was the beginning of California's agricultural industry. The ice industry also attracted the interest of brewers. The Boca Brewery was established near both the railroad and the ice houses. Hops and malt were brought to the Boca by the railroad. Ice was supplied from the frozen ponds, and bottled beer was shipped to San Francisco and other locations in the West. Smooth lager beer needs to be cold as it is for many. At temperatures just above freezing, the lager yeast works its magic over many months to create the crisp, clean, dry flavors characteristic of lager beer. This was a very successful operation until mechanical refrigeration arrived and the San Francisco breweries were able to produce their own lager beer. Charles McGlashan was a Truckee newspaper publisher and a promoter of Truckee tourism. To attract tourists, he helped build an ice palace in downtown Truckee. The ice palace was constructed of a wood frame wrapped in chicken wire that was sprayed with water each night. There was an ice rink inside and a toboggan run at one end. As more tourists arrived, one of the area's first ski runs was built where the Cottonwood restaurant stands today. The ski area had a ski lift and a ski jump. It was the beginning of the surrounding area's ski industry. Skiing and other forms of tourism continued to grow. In 1960, the Winter Olympics were held in what was then called Squaw Valley. Tourists flocked up on the partially completed Interstate 80 and old Highway 40. I-80 was completed shortly after the Olympics ended, but the wide all-year highway was a big hit. Truckee's population went from approximately 2,000 in 1960 to over 20,000 in 2020. The last exhibit is a wall of railroad models showing the evolution of equipment from the first locomotive that came to Truckee in 1868 to the trains of today. In 1869, the locomotive Jupiter pulled the Central Pacific Railroad's dignitaries through Truckee and on to Promontory Summit, Utah, where it met a Union Pacific's locomotive. There, the golden spikes were pounded in, symbolizing the union of the two railroads and the completion of the first transcontinental railroad. Another model was a huge steam engine called a cab forward. The cab and front design enabled trains to travel through Truckee's long tunnels without smoke choking the fireman and engineer. Well, the Museum of Truckee History is now officially open. Initially, it will be open from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Saturday and Sunday. As we get more docents, we hope to have it open from Thursday through Monday. If you'd like to be a docent and share Truckee stories with visitors, please contact us at the Museum of Truckee History at gmail.com. We'll give you training on being a docent and introductions and instruction about Truckee's history. I'd like to thank Jeremy Lynn, who's manager of the Donner Memorial Visitor Center, Grave Zerbal, who's president of the Truckee Donner Historical Society and curator of the Museum of Truckee History, Bill Odegeese and Norm Saylor for their operation of the 20-mile museum and the Donner Summit Museum. And I'd like to thank the following exhibit developers: Sean Mortier, who did the Trainmaster and McGlashan's exhibits, Greg Zerbal, who did the logging and Indian exhibits, Ed Larson, who did the ice industry exhibit, Dave DePoo, who did the Boca Brewery and tourism exhibits, and Dan Cobb and Bob Bell, who did the railroad exhibit. And I worked on the Chinese exhibit. Thank you. I hope you get to enjoy one or all of Truckee museums soon. Good day.